The billionaire refused to hold any child. Until the maid's toddler whispered one word. The ballroom glittered with gold light and quiet money. Waiters moved between tables balancing trays of champagne. Somewhere a string quartet played something soft and forgettable. Marcus Hale stood near the back wall, hands in his pockets, doing what he always did at these charity events. Smiling just enough. Saying just enough. Leaving as soon as possible. He didn't see the little girl until she was already running at him. She couldn't have been more than 4. Someone's daughter, dressed in a small blue party dress, laughing the way only children laugh, like nothing bad has ever happened to them yet. Her arms were already open before she reached him. "Mister, catch me." Marcus stepped back so fast he knocked into the table behind him. A glass toppled. Champagne spread across white linen like a stain spreading across silence. The girl stopped, confused, her small arm still half raised. For 1 second, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus's face had gone pale, almost grey. His jaw was tight. His hands, usually so steady in every negotiation, in every boardroom, were shaking. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "To no one. To everyone." His assistant appeared instantly, the way good assistants do, guiding him gently toward the exit, murmuring something about an early morning call. The girl's mother scooped her up, embarrassed, whispering apologies that no one had asked for. By the time Marcus reached his car, his hands had not stopped shaking. His driver didn't ask questions. He never did. 3 days later, at the Hale estate, a new housekeeper would walk through the front gates for the very first time, with her 3-year-old daughter holding her hand because there had been no one else to watch her. She did not know the rule yet. No children. Not one. Not ever. She did not know why. And she had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, her daughter would wander down a quiet hallway, stop in front of a locked door no one was allowed to open, and reach for the handle. Elena Reyes had exactly $11 in her checking account and a daughter who trusted her completely. Those were the only 2 facts she was sure of as she stood at the base of the Hale estate's long gravel driveway, gripping Mia's small hand. The house rose in front of her like something from a magazine. Stone and glass and too many windows to count. Elena had cleaned houses for 10 years, but never one like this. "Mommy, it's big," Mia whispered. "I know, baby." The babysitter had cancelled 40 minutes ago. No warning, just a text. "Sorry, can't today." Elena had no backup. No family in the city. No money for an emergency sitter. And she could not, would not, call in sick on her very first day. So she'd made a choice. Bring Mia. Keep her quiet. Keep her close. Pray no one noticed. The household manager, a tall woman named Priya with tired eyes and a clipboard, met her at the side door and looked down at Mia with something between panic and pity. "You can't bring a child here," Priya said, voice low, glancing over her shoulder. "It's the one rule. The only rule that actually matters." "I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Please." Elena's voice cracked on the last word. "I need this job." Priya studied her for a long moment. Then she sighed, the particular sigh of someone breaking a rule they didn't fully understand themselves. "Keep her in the kitchen. Don't let her wander. If he sees her." "Who's he?" "Mr. Hale." Priya said the name like it explained everything and nothing at all. Just, keep her close. For the first 20 minutes, Elena did exactly that. She scrubbed countertops with Mia sitting on a stool beside her, coloring quietly on the back of a grocery receipt. It was working. It was fine. Then the doorbell rang, and Priya disappeared to answer it, and Elena turned her back for 11 seconds to reach a bottle of cleaner from a low cabinet. When she turned around, the stool was empty. Mia had never seen a hallway so long. It stretched out like a river of gold-brown wood, lined with paintings of places she didn't recognize. Mountains, oceans, a garden with white flowers. At the very end stood a door. Just a door. But something about it pulled her forward the way a nightlight pulls a child out of bed at 2 a.m. She didn't know why she wanted to open it. She just did. Her small hand had almost reached the handle when a voice cut through the quiet like a dropped plate. "Don't." Mia turned. A man stood a few feet away. Tall. Dark suit. His face had gone the color of old paper. "Step away from that door," Marcus said, and his voice shook on every word. Mia didn't move at first, more curious than afraid. "Why?" "Because I said so." He crossed the distance between them fast, closing his hand gently but firmly around her shoulder, guiding her back down the hallway. His hands, she noticed, were trembling. "Mia." Elena came around the corner at a near run, face white with panic. "Mia, oh my God, I'm so sorry." She scooped her daughter up, already backing away, already bracing for the words that would end her job before her first shift was even over. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He was staring at the door at the end of the hall like it might open on its own. "Take her to the kitchen," he finally said. "And don't let this happen again." That was all. No shouting. No firing. Just 5 words that landed heavier than any scream could have. Elena nodded, murmured another apology, and hurried away with Mia clinging to her neck. Marcus stood alone in the hallway a long time after they'd gone. That night, in his study, Marcus found a piece of paper sitting squarely in the center of his desk. A crayon drawing. 3 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, a small one, holding hands under a yellow sun. He didn't remember anyone bringing paper into this room. He didn't remember allowing crayons in this house at all. He picked it up, intending to throw it away. He didn't. Instead he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he never opened, and set the drawing gently on top of something already inside. Something with a small pink ribbon around it. He closed the drawer before he let himself look too closely. Priya found Elena in the laundry room an hour later, her face still pale. "He's not firing you," Priya said without preamble. "I checked. But you need childcare sorted by Friday, or the agency will pull you from this house permanently." "Friday," Elena repeated. She did the math in her head the way she always did. Babysitter cost against grocery money, against the eviction notice folded in her purse, against the medical bill still unpaid from last spring. The numbers never worked. They hadn't worked in months. "I don't have anyone," she admitted quietly. "It's just us." Priya's expression softened, just slightly. "Then find someone by Friday. Because I can't protect you from what happens if you don't." Later, after the house had gone quiet and most of the staff had left for the night, Elena caught Mia standing outside the study door, holding half a cookie in both hands. "What are you doing, baby?" Mia set the cookie gently on the floor outside the door, the way someone leaves an offering at a shrine. "For the sad man," she whispered, like it was obvious. Elena didn't have the heart to make her take it back. What neither of them knew was that behind the door, through the narrow gap where it hadn't quite latched shut, Marcus was watching. He didn't come out. He didn't say a word. He simply stood there, staring at a 3-year-old's cookie sitting on his floor like something precious, for longer than he would ever admit to another living soul. The next morning, Elena arrived early, hoping to prove she still deserved to be there. She was crossing the back hallway near the security office when she heard Daniel Cho's voice through a half-open door, low and clipped, the tone of a man used to being obeyed. "I need a full background check." "Yes, the new housekeeper. Reyes. Everything. Employment history, family, financials. And I want it by tonight." Elena froze against the wall, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. Full background checks weren't standard for housekeeping staff. She knew that much from 10 years in this line of work. Something else was happening here, something bigger than a spilled cup of coffee or a wandering toddler. She thought of the locked door. The trembling hands. The 5 quiet words that had somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. Why does a billionaire need to know everything about a maid? She didn't have an answer. But standing there in that hallway, some small, frightened part of her understood. Whatever this house was hiding, she and Mia had already walked straight into the middle of it. By Wednesday, something had shifted. though Elena couldn't have said exactly what. Mia had taken to sitting on the kitchen floor near the pantry, humming to herself while she lined up bottle caps in careful rows, her own private game. It was harmless. It was quiet. And when Marcus passed through the kitchen that morning on his way to his study, he didn't order her removed. He told himself it was simply easier not to make a scene twice in 1 week. He didn't examine the thought too closely. He came back through an hour later for coffee, moving fast, phone pressed to his ear, mind already 3 meetings ahead. He almost didn't stop. Then he heard it. A small, tuneless hum. A simple melody, for notes repeating, rising and falling the way a lullaby does. Marcus stopped walking so suddenly that the person on the phone asked if he was still there. "I'll call you back," he said, and hung up without waiting for a reply. He stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at Mia, who kept humming and stacking bottle caps, completely unaware that she'd just knocked the air out of a grown man's chest. That melody. He knew that melody. He had made it up himself, years ago, humming it at 2 a.m. to a baby who wouldn't sleep. He had sung it exactly 3 times to exactly one other living person, and one of them had died taking it with her. There was no way this child could know it. There was no way. "Where did you learn that?" His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Mia looked up, unbothered. "I don't know. I just know it." He wanted to ask more. He didn't. He turned and walked out of the kitchen instead, his hand pressed briefly against the doorframe like he needed it to stay standing. That afternoon, Richard Voss found him in the study, staring at nothing in particular. Voss had been Marcus's COO for 6 years, sharp, loyal to the company if not always to the man, and currently very worried about the calendar. "We're 2 days from the Investor Roadshow," Voss said without sitting down. "The biggest raise in company history. And I'm hearing whispers. A tabloid stringer's been asking questions about a child at this house." Marcus's jaw tightened. "There's no child living here. There's a housekeeper's kid running around your kitchen, Marcus. People talk. Staff talk. And after everything with..." Voss stopped himself, choosing his next words with visible care. "After everything that happened before, any mention of a child near your name is a headline waiting to happen. Right before we ask investors to trust you with $400 million. It's one housekeeper's daughter, for 2 more days. It's nothing. Make sure it stays nothing," Voss said, and left. Marcus sat alone for a long time after that, turning a pen over in his fingers, doing nothing at all. It was Daniel who finally said the words out loud that night, though he clearly hadn't planned to. They were in the security office, reviewing footage of the gates, a routine check that had become an excuse for Marcus to avoid an empty house. Daniel had worked for Marcus for 11 years. He'd been there for all of it. "You've been different this week," Daniel said carefully, not looking up from the monitor. "Since the kid showed up." Marcus didn't answer. "You know it's been 3 years," Daniel added, quieter now. "Since Bella." The name landed in the room like a dropped glass. Marcus's voice, when it came, was almost steady. "I was on a call. In the car. She was in the back seat, and I was on a call, and then there was a truck, and then there wasn't a car anymore." "Marcus." "I did that," Marcus said. "Whatever else anyone tells themselves about that day, I was the one driving. I was the one who wasn't paying attention. That's the only fact that matters." Daniel didn't argue. He'd tried, years ago, and learned there was no arguing with a man who had already sentenced himself. "That's why the door stays locked," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. That's why there are no children in this house. Because every time I see one, I see the back seat. And I can't," he stopped. "I can't do that again." Diane arrived the next morning without calling first, the way she sometimes still did. 3 years of divorce papers apparently not enough to change old habits. She saw the small stuffed rabbit, Mia's, left forgotten on the hallway bench, before she saw anyone else, and something in her face simply broke open. "Whose is this?" Her voice climbed fast, from confusion to something close to panic. "Marcus." Whose is this? The housekeeper's daughter. She's not, Diane, it's not what you think. You said no children. You promised me. That was the one thing. Diane's hands were shaking now too, mirroring his own from days earlier, grief finding new ways to surface even after 3 years of practice at holding it down. They stood in the driveway a long time, two people who had once shared everything and now shared only the worst day of their lives, saying nothing that helped either of them. She left 20 minutes later without going inside. Marcus called Elena into his study that evening. He'd spent the afternoon staring at the folder Daniel had prepared, Elena's employment history, her financials, small details of a life he had no real right to know. Something in it had unsettled him more than he expected. "Sit down," he said, and Elena did, hands folded tightly in her lap, certain this was the moment she'd feared since Monday. Marcus held up the folder. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course." "Did the staffing agency send you here on purpose?" His eyes were fixed on her, searching for something. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what happened in this house?" Elena blinked, genuinely confused. "I don't understand the question." "I think you do. Mr. Hale, I took this job because I needed one. I didn't choose this house. The agency assigned me here 3 weeks ago. I don't know anything about you except what the staff whisper when they think I can't hear." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, searching for a lie he couldn't quite find. "Then why," he said slowly, "does your late husband's name appear in a maintenance file for a car dealership 11 miles from here? A dealership my family used for years." Elena went very still. "My husband," she said carefully, "was a mechanic for 12 years before he got sick. He worked on a lot of cars. I don't know what file you're talking about." "Thomas Reyes," Marcus said, reading from the folder. "Signed off on brake service for a vehicle registered to this address. 3 years and 2 months ago." The color drained slowly from Elena's face. "That's not possible," she whispered. But something in her eyes said it was. Neither of them said the date out loud. Neither of them had to. 3 years and 2 months ago was exactly when Bella Hale had died in the back seat of a car that lost its brakes on a wet road. The room went very quiet. "There has to be a mistake," Elena said, though her voice had lost its certainty. "Thomas never mentioned working on a car from this house. He would have told me." "Would he?" Marcus's voice was flat, controlled in the particular way of a man holding back something enormous. "Because in 3 years, no one has ever explained to me why the brakes on my wife's car failed on a dry evening, on a road my driver had taken 1,000 times without incident. I don't know anything about that night. I swear to you. But your husband might have." Elena pressed her hand to her mouth. Whatever she was remembering, it was costing her something to say out loud. "Thomas got sick 2 years ago," she finally said. "Before he died, there were nights he couldn't sleep. He told me once, just once, about a brake job he'd flagged as unsafe. Said the pads were worn past spec, said it needed a full service, not a patch. His shop manager told him to sign off on it anyway. Said the client didn't want to wait. Thomas argued, and lost, because he needed the paycheck same as I need this one now. And he never knew whose car it was. He never said a make, a name, an address. Just that it haunted him. Until my first day here." Her voice cracked. "I saw this address on my assignment sheet, and something about it felt familiar, and I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to believe it. I still don't know for certain that it's the same car." Marcus stared at her, searching for deceit and finding only grief that matched his own. "If this is true," he said quietly, "then somebody in this house made a decision that killed my daughter. And it wasn't a truck on a wet road. It was a piece of paper somebody signed." Neither of them slept that night. A storm rolled in past midnight, the kind that shakes windows and drops the power without warning. Marcus was in his study when the lights cut out, the whole house falling into sudden blackness broken only by lightning. He heard small footsteps before he saw her. Mia appeared in his doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, face pale with fear at the dark and the thunder. "Mommy's looking for the flashlight," she whispered. I got scared. Marcus should have called for Elena. He should have stepped back, the way he always did. Instead, without quite deciding to, he knelt down and said, "Come here." Mia climbed into his lap without hesitation, the way children do when they haven't yet learned to be afraid of grown men who are afraid of themselves. She pressed her small face into his shoulder as thunder cracked outside. Marcus sat frozen for a moment, arms hovering, unsure if his body even remembered how to do this. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around her. It was the first time in 3 years he had held a child. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply sat there in the dark, feeling a small heartbeat against his chest, until the storm passed and Elena came rushing in with a flashlight and stopped cold in the doorway at what she saw. She didn't say anything either. She just watched, something unreadable moving across her face, and let the moment be what it was. By morning, the storm outside had passed. The one inside the company had just begun. Richard Voss stood in the kitchen doorway at 7 a.m., holding his phone out like evidence. "Have you seen this?" Marcus took the phone. A headline glowed up at him from a gossip site, ugly and immediate. "Billionaire's mystery made linked to daughter's fatal crash. Sources say Hale knew." The article was sloppy, half-true, and devastating anyway. Fragments of fact twisted into something that made Elena sound complicit, made Marcus sound like he'd been hiding a scandal instead of grieving a tragedy. Where did this come from? Marcus's voice was low and dangerous. Voss didn't quite meet his eyes. "Does it matter? What matters is we're 24 hours from the roadshow, and every investor in that room is going to be reading this over breakfast." "Did you leak this?" "I protected the company," Voss said, which wasn't a denial. "I gave a reporter enough truth to control the story before it became something worse. That's my job, Marcus. That's what you pay me for. You used my daughter's death as a press strategy. I used it as damage control because you weren't going to do anything about the real problem, which is that woman and her kid living under your roof 3 days before we ask the market to trust your judgment." By mid-morning, photographers had gathered at the front gates, a small ugly crowd with long lenses pointed at every window. The board called an emergency call for that afternoon. Voss, cornered by his own mess, pushed harder than ever. "Fire her," he said, flat and urgent, before the call even started. "Today. Publicly, if you have to. Give them a clean story. Housekeeper let go over background check issue, nothing more. It ends the narrative before it costs us the raise." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "And if she's the only person who might actually know what happened to my daughter? Then find out quietly, after Friday. Right now I need you to protect $400 million and 11 years of work." Marcus stood at the window, watching the cameras outside the gate, thinking of small footsteps in a hallway, a lullaby with no explanation, a woman shaking hands admitting a truth that could destroy them both. He had built an empire out of never making an emotional decision under pressure. He had never faced a decision like this. Protect the company he'd spent his whole adult life building, the one thing he had left that still made sense, by cutting loose the one person who might finally tell him the truth about the worst night of his life. Or risk everything he'd built, for a woman he'd known 5 days, and a child whose whispered lullaby had cracked something open in him he thought had died 3 years ago. "I need an hour," he told the board. He did not yet know what he was going to do with it. Marcus didn't spend the hour deciding what to tell the board. He spent it in the security office with Daniel, pulling every file connected to the night Bella died. "I want the original accident report," Marcus said. "Not the summary I read 3 years ago. The full file. And I want Walter's service logs from that month." Daniel hesitated. "Walter's been with this family 15 years, Marcus. I know how long he's been with this family. I want the logs anyway." Elena arrived 20 minutes later, uninvited, holding something in both hands like it might break. I found this, she said, setting a worn spiral notebook on the desk. It was Thomas's. I kept all his old work journals after he passed. I never really looked through them until last night. She opened it to a page marked with a torn corner. Cramped handwriting, half technical shorthand, half a tired man venting to no one. Flagged brake pads on black sedan. Plate ending 4471. Told manager unsafe. Needs full replace not patch job. Manager said client in a hurry. Sign off anyway. Did it. Don't feel right about it. Daniel went pale reading over Marcus's shoulder. That's a partial plate match to your wife's car. They spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing dates, records, delivery logs, the quiet, unglamorous work of finding a truth nobody had wanted to look for in 3 years. What they found wasn't a conspiracy. It was something smaller, and somehow worse. A recall notice had been mailed to the estate 6 weeks before the accident, a manufacturer's safety bulletin about exactly the brake component in question. It had been logged as received by household staff. And then, according to every record they could find, it had simply never been passed along. Who logs incoming mail at the house? Marcus asked, though some part of him already knew the answer before Daniel said it. Walter. They found him in the garage, exactly where he always was in the evenings, polishing a car that didn't need polishing. Walter had driven for the Hale family for 15 years. He'd taught Marcus's daughter to whistle. He'd been the one who carried her into the house asleep more nights than Marcus could count. He looked up when they walked in and seemed to know, instantly, why they'd come. I found the notice 3 weeks after, Walter said, before anyone asked a single question. His voice was steady in the way of a man who had rehearsed this confession 1,000 times in his head and never once said it out loud. Buried under a stack of mail from a week I barely remember. Your father was in the hospital, Diane's mother had just passed, the house was chaos. I don't remember reading it. I don't remember not reading it. I've spent 3 years trying to remember, and I can't. You never told anyone. What was I supposed to say? Walter's hands trembled around the polishing cloth. That I might have killed her. That somewhere in that stack of mail was the one piece of paper that could have saved her, and I don't even remember seeing it. His voice broke. I've given every extra dollar I have to a scholarship fund in her name for 3 years. Anonymously. Because I couldn't face you, and I couldn't face myself, and I didn't know what else a guilty man was supposed to do. The garage was silent except for the distant sound of the storm's last rain against the roof. Marcus stood there for a long time, feeling something he hadn't expected to feel. Not the anger he'd braced for, but something closer to recognition. A man carrying blame for a mistake, unable to prove whether it was truly his fault, breaking himself slowly over 3 years rather than ask for forgiveness. He knew that man. He'd been looking at him in the mirror every morning. You should have told me, Marcus finally said. Not for my sake. For yours. You didn't have to carry this alone. I didn't think I deserved to put it down. Marcus thought of Thomas Reyes signing a form he knew was wrong because he needed a paycheck. He thought of himself, on a phone call instead of watching the road. He thought of a chain of small, human, unbearable mistakes. No villain, no plot, just tired people failing each other in 100 quiet ways that added up to one unbearable loss. Nobody killed her on purpose, Marcus said, more to himself than to Walter. That's the part one couldn't accept. I needed someone to blame, because the alternative was accepting that sometimes the worst thing in the world happens because of mail nobody read and forms nobody argued about hard enough. He didn't forgive Walter in that moment because Walter asked him to. He forgave him because doing so was the only way to finally set down the same guilt himself. There was no time to sit with any of it. By 6 that evening, Voss had gone around Marcus entirely, calling an emergency board session to invoke a rarely used clause, temporary removal of a founder's operational authority in the interest of company stability during a credibility crisis. He had the votes lined up. He had the story ready. All he needed was Marcus absent from the room to make it official. The vote was scheduled for 8 the next morning. 48 hours had become 12. Marcus barely had time to process any of it before Priya found him in the hallway, her face tight with something worse than professional concern. "Elena's gone," she said. "She packed her things 20 minutes ago. Took Mia. Left through the staff entrance so the photographers wouldn't see them." "Gone where?" She said the bus station. She said. Priya hesitated. She said she wasn't going to let her daughter grow up as a headline in someone else's tragedy. Marcus went to the staff quarters anyway, some part of him refusing to believe it until he saw the empty room himself. The bed was stripped. The closet was bare. On the small desk sat a single piece of paper. It was the same crayon drawing from days before, 3 stick figures under a yellow sun, except now, in careful, wobbling toddler letters that Elena must have helped guide, someone had added 2 words beneath it. "For Papa." Marcus stood there holding it, aware of 2 impossible clocks ticking at once. A board vote at 8 that would decide the fate of everything he'd built. And a bus, somewhere across the city, that would not wait for anyone. Marcus didn't go to the boardroom. He got in his car at 11 that night, drove himself for the first time in years, and headed for the bus station instead. Because some decisions only mean something if you make them before you know how they'll turn out. The station was nearly empty, fluorescent lights humming over a handful of tired travelers. He found them at gate 14, Elena sitting stiff and upright on a plastic bench, Mia asleep against her shoulder with the stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Elena looked up when she heard footsteps, and for a moment her face went through fear, exhaustion, and something like reluctant relief, all at once. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly, careful not to wake Mia. "I did, actually." Marcus sat down on the bench across from her, close enough to talk, far enough to give her room. "I have a board vote in 9 hours that could take away everything I've built. I came here first." "That's not smart business." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked down at her sleeping daughter. "I can't keep doing this." Reporters outside the gate. My daughter's photo blurred out on some website next to the word scandal. "I have $11 in my account and a bus ticket, and that's still better than staying somewhere my child gets treated like evidence." "You're not evidence," Marcus said. "You're not even a suspect. You never were. Whatever happened 3 years ago, it wasn't you, and it wasn't your husband either. It was a form nobody argued about hard enough, and a piece of mail nobody read in the middle of the worst week of my family's life. Walter told me everything tonight." Elena's breath caught. "Walter. He's carried it alone for 3 years. So did I, just a different piece of it." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I spent 3 years believing I killed my daughter because I was on a phone call. I needed there to be one moment, one mistake, one person to blame, mostly myself. The truth is smaller and worse than that. It was several small failures, by several tired people, none of whom meant any harm. Your husband flagged a real problem and got overruled. Walter missed 1 letter in a terrible week. I was distracted for 10 seconds on a road I'd driven 1,000 times. That doesn't make it easier." "No," Marcus said. "But it makes it true. And I'd rather carry something true than keep punishing people, including myself, for something none of us fully did." Mia stirred against her mother's shoulder, blinking slowly awake. She looked at Marcus with the unguarded curiosity only small children still have, unclouded by anything the adults around her were carrying. "Hi," she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Hi," Marcus said back, and found that his voice, for once, didn't shake. He made it to the boardroom 4 minutes before the vote, still in yesterday's clothes, Elena and Mia waiting in the car outside because he'd asked them to. Voss was mid-sentence when Marcus walked in, laying out a clean, careful version of events for 11 board members and a lawyer. A version with no mention of Walter, no mention of Thomas, no mention of any recall notice. Just an unstable founder, an inappropriate staff relationship, and a company that needed steady hands before Friday's roadshow. "Actually," Marcus said, taking the seat at the head of the table, Let me tell you what really happened. He told them everything. The recall notice. Walter's mistake and 3 years of anonymous guilt. Thomas Reyes and the brake pads he'd flagged and been overruled on. His own 10 seconds of distraction on a road he knew too well. He told them about a lullaby a 3-year-old shouldn't have known, and a cookie left outside a locked door, and a woman who had done nothing wrong except need a job badly enough to bring her daughter to work. There's no scandal here, Marcus said. There's a tragedy, and it's mine, and I've spent 3 years mishandling my own grief instead of understanding it. That's on me. Mr. Voss leaked a private family loss to a reporter to protect a stock price. That's on him. The room was silent. Voss's face had gone the color of old paper. This is exactly the instability the board is concerned about, Voss said quickly, recovering. A founder making emotional decisions instead of. I fed a story about a dead child to a tabloid to save my own position, Marcus said, cutting him off, calm and clear. That's not a strategic decision. That's a betrayal. The board can decide what they think that says about who should be trusted with authority in this company. They didn't need long to decide. By 9 that morning, Richard Voss had resigned, not fired outright, but with no real choice left, the board unwilling to defend a man who'd used a grieving family's tragedy as leverage. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't vengeful. It was simply the natural, unglamorous consequence of a man who had let ambition outrun decency. The roadshow went forward as planned, 2 days later, with an unusually honest founder standing in front of investors and telling them, essentially, the same thing he'd told the board. Some walked away uneasy. Most didn't. People trust honesty more than they trust a clean story, even in rooms full of money. Diane called that evening, her voice careful, the way people talk when they've decided something in advance and are afraid of losing their nerve. I heard about the board meeting, she said. About what you told them. I should have told you first. Maybe. Or maybe you needed to tell yourself first. A long pause. I've spent 3 years blaming you, Marcus. Because it was easier than blaming a stack of unopened mail, or a mechanic I never met, or nobody at all. I think some part of me needed there to be a villain, too. I know the feeling. I don't forgive you because you deserve it, Diane said quietly. I forgive you because I'm tired of carrying it, and I don't think either of us can heal while we're still holding the other one responsible for something neither of us fully controlled. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't the marriage coming back. It was simpler than that. 2 grieving parents finally agreeing to stop weaponizing their grief against each other. Thank you, Marcus said, and meant it more than he'd meant almost anything in 3 years. Marcus found Walter in the garage again, 2 days later, still polishing the same car. The board knows, Marcus said. Everything. I made sure it was clear it wasn't malice. Just a terrible week and 1 missed letter. Walter's hands went still. Are you letting me go? I'm giving you a choice. Keep driving for this family, if you can forgive yourself enough to stay. Or step back, if you can't. Either way, the scholarship fund you've been quietly running alone for 3 years, I'd like to make it official. With your name on it, not hidden. Walter looked up, eyes wet. I don't need my name on anything. I know. That's exactly why it should be there. The locked door at the end of the east hallway stayed locked for 1 more week. Marcus opened it alone, on a quiet Sunday morning, and stood for a long time in the doorway of a room that hadn't changed in 3 years. A small bed, a shelf of books, a mobile of paper stars still turning gently in a draft from the window. He didn't cry the way he expected to. He mostly just breathed. 3 weeks later, half the room became something new, not erased, not forgotten, but transformed. A small reading nook for grief support sessions Marcus arranged for other families who'd lost children to preventable accidents. A wall of scholarship recipients' photos, funded in Bella's name, the fund now formally established with Walter's name listed beside hers as co-founder. A single shelf, kept exactly as it was, holding her books and 1 small stuffed elephant nobody touched. It wasn't a shrine anymore. It was a door that stayed open. Elena and Mia never left, in the end. Not because Marcus asked them to stay out of guilt, and not because Elena needed rescuing. She made that clear more than once, in the plain, unimpressed way of a woman who had survived plenty without anyone's help. They stayed because something quieter had grown in the space of 11 strange days. Not romance, not yet anything with a name, just two wounded people and one small, fearless child slowly building something that looked, from a distance, almost like a family finding its footing again. One evening, months later, Mia ran through the garden calling for him the way she called for everyone she loved without hesitation. "Papa! Come see!" Marcus knelt down without flinching, without freezing, without the old cold rush of grief closing his throat. He simply opened his arms, and this time, he didn't step back. He picked her up and held her, the way he hadn't let himself hold any child in 3 years. Not because she had replaced anyone, but because he had finally understood that loving her wasn't a betrayal of the daughter he'd lost. It was proof that love, even after the worst loss imaginable, still knew how to find its way back in. 1 year later. The garden dedication was small, no press, no cameras, just family and a handful of scholarship recipients standing beneath a newly planted tree with a modest stone marker at its base, in memory of Bella Hale. In honor of second chances. Elena stood beside Marcus, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. Mia sat cross-legged in the grass nearby, humming that same simple 4-note melody to herself, utterly unaware of what it had once meant, or what it had helped begin. Marcus watched her for a long moment, then looked at Elena. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on this house. Even when it gave you every reason to." "Thank your daughter," Elena said softly. "The drawing. The cookie. The lullaby she somehow knew. I think some part of her already understood what all of us were too afraid to say out loud." Marcus didn't have an explanation for the lullaby, not a scientific one, not one that would satisfy Voss's old world of clean, provable facts. Some things simply happened, unexplained, and asked only to be received with grace instead of suspicion. He'd spent 3 years believing love was something you lost once and never got back. He'd needed one small girl, one whispered word, and one very long week to learn he'd been wrong. If someone in your own life ever taught you how to love again after loss, a child, a stranger, a small unexpected kindness, tell us about them in the comments below. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths.